At least you can use it to store recipes, mother-in-law. That's what my daughter-in-law said, laughing, while my sons divided $30 million like it was a card game. They took the companies, the houses, the cars, every single thing their father built, and left me holding a dusty envelope that looked like trash. No one looked at me. No one asked if I was okay. After 45 years of marriage, that was all I got. I remember walking out of that office numb, trying to understand how love and loyalty could be rewarded with humiliation. That night, I sat alone at the kitchen table staring at the envelope, too afraid to open it, too broken to cry. But when I finally tore it open, I found not a letter or some memory, but a single piece of paper with a Swiss bank account number and one line in my husband's handwriting. This is for the woman who always loved me truly. My hands were shaking as I read it, and I had no idea that what came next would not only expose the truth but change my life forever. If you've ever felt betrayed by your own family, stay with me, because what I discovered that night will make you believe in justice again. And if this story hits home, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe before we dive in. The lawyer's office smelled clean and expensive. Everything was polished wood and glass, like the kind of place where real decisions are made. I sat between my two sons, Andrew and Lucas. On my left, Andrew leaned back in his chair, confident, sure of himself, like he already knew how the day would go. On my right, Lucas couldn't stop fidgeting. He kept looking down at the papers in front of him, not at me. His wife, Rachel, was sitting beside him, crossing and uncrossing her legs, her perfume so strong I could taste it. Mr. Clarkson, our lawyer, cleared his throat and began to read my husband's will. As per the last testament of Mr. Henry Cole, he said, the estate will be divided as follows. I held my breath. I had told myself not to expect much, but part of me still believed Henry would take care of me. After 45 years together, I thought he would make sure I'd live comfortably. To my eldest son, Andrew Cole, Clarkson read, I leave full ownership of Cole and Bloom Construction, along with all its subsidiaries and assets. I turned to look at Andrew, and he smiled like someone who had just won a bet. He didn't even glance in my direction. To my younger son, Lucas Cole, the lawyer continued, I leave the restaurant chain, including all properties and staff, valued at $9 million. Lucas looked relieved, like he'd been waiting to exhale. Rachel leaned in, whispering something to him that made him smile. Then she looked at the lawyer and asked, And the Aspen house? Clarkson nodded, checking the papers. The Aspen vacation property is left to Mrs. Rachel Cole. Rachel smiled, turning toward me like she had just been crowned queen. Well, she said, I guess I'll make sure it's taken care of. I sat there waiting. There had to be more. Henry wouldn't forget me. He couldn't. I was his wife for almost half a century. We built everything together from nothing. I sold my jewelry so he could open his first company. I stayed home when he traveled for weeks. I raised the boys while he worked late. I was there through all of it. Clarkson flipped to the last page. And to Mrs. Margaret Cole, he said, I leave this. He reached into his briefcase and took out a small wooden box. It was old, the color of faded maple. He placed it gently in front of me like it might break. I stared at it, not understanding. That's it? I asked quietly. Yes, Clarkson said. That was Mr. Cole's wish. Before I could say anything, Rachel leaned forward and smiled that sharp little smile she always had when she wanted to humiliate me. Maybe you can use it to keep your art brushes, Mom. The room went silent for a second. Then Andrew laughed. Lucas tried not to, but I saw the corner of his mouth twitch. I didn't say a word. I couldn't. Something in me froze. I just stared at the box. It was small enough to fit in both hands, light enough that I could probably lift it with one finger. It looked like something you'd find in a forgotten drawer. Mr. Clarkson closed the folder. That concludes the reading of the will, he said. Andrew stood up first, already talking about business documents, tax transfers, and meetings with accountants. Rachel followed him, checking her phone. Lucas signed a few papers and said something to the lawyer I didn't even hear. Nobody looked at me. Nobody asked how I felt or if I needed help getting home. After 45 years of building that life, of standing by Henry through every high and low, I walked out of that office like a stranger. Outside, the sun was too bright. The city noise hit me all at once. I started walking without really knowing where I was going. I could still hear Rachel's voice in my head. Maybe you can use it for your brushes? Every word burned. By the time I reached home, I was exhausted. I set the box on the kitchen table, the same table where Henry and I had breakfast every morning for decades. I made a cup of tea, but my hands were shaking so badly I spilled half of it. I kept staring at that box, wondering what on earth he could have meant by leaving it to me. Was it supposed to be symbolic? Was he punishing me for something? Did he think I didn't deserve what we built together? I tried to remember if we had fought before he got sick, if there was something I said that might have hurt him. But there was nothing. I had been there every step of the way. Hours passed. The sun went down. The house was silent except for the ticking clock in the hallway. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I pulled the box closer and unlatched it. It creaked open. Inside was a single envelope, yellowed around the edges. My name was written on it in Henry's handwriting. The same neat, steady script he used in all his notes and birthday cards. I opened it slowly, expecting a short goodbye or a sentimental memory, but there was only one sentence. "This is for the woman who always loved me truly." And below it, a long number written in ink. At first, I thought it was some kind of reference or old account number. Then I noticed the bank name, Swiss International Bank, Geneva. My heart started pounding. Henry never had any accounts overseas, at least none that I knew of. Why would he hide something like that from me? And why give it only to me? I sat there for a long time staring at the paper. The house felt colder. I thought about everything I just witnessed that morning. My sons, my daughter-in-law, their laughter, their greed. I felt anger rise inside me, slow but steady. I folded the paper, placed it back in the envelope, and held it to my chest. Whatever this meant, I knew one thing for sure. It wasn't over. Henry had left me something, not just money, maybe something more important. A truth. I didn't know yet what it was, but I was going to find out. When I got home, the apartment felt too big. The silence followed me from room to room. Everywhere I looked, there were pieces of my life with Henry. The photos, the books, the tiny oil diffuser on the kitchen counter. The same one we used in the early days when everything started in this small kitchen. I remember that first night like it was yesterday. The stove barely worked, the counters were too small, and we didn't even have proper bottles yet. Henry was sitting at the table mixing essential oils in old jam jars, and I was taking notes on a napkin. He looked up and smiled at me, the way he used to when we were still dreaming. "We're a team, Maggie," he said. "You and me, that's all we need." Back then, I believed him completely. We worked side by side, sometimes until dawn. I handled the orders, the packaging, the phone calls, the suppliers. He went out to pitch our little brand to stores that didn't even want to hear us out. For years, we lived on instant noodles and hope. I still remember the first time one of our products appeared on a store shelf. It was a tiny jar of cream with a label we printed ourselves. A woman came back a week later just to tell me, "This little jar smells like happiness." I cried that night. Not because of the sale, but because I felt seen. For a brief moment, I felt like all the effort meant something. But success has a strange way of changing people. When Henry started getting invited to interviews and business events, everything shifted. The company we built together became his company. Publicly, I became Mrs. Cole, someone in the background who smiled politely but didn't speak. He told me it was better for the image of the brand. "You're the heart of it, Maggie," he said once, trying to reassure me. "But people need to see one clear face. Don't take it personally." I told him I understood, but deep down, it stung. I was proud of him, of course I was. But the more successful he became, the smaller my world got. Reporters stopped asking for both of us. They wanted Henry alone. At company events, people shook his hand and barely nodded at me. And when I tried to speak about new ideas or formulas, he said, "You don't have to worry about that stuff anymore. Just relax. You've done enough." He didn't mean to hurt me. I know that now. He was just caught up in the business, in the attention, in being seen as the man who built an empire. But every time he said I'd done enough, it felt like a quiet goodbye. The years passed faster than I realized. The boys grew up and started working for him. They treated him like a king and me like an old piece of furniture in the house, useful once, now just taking up space. I used to tell myself that it was fine, that this was what mothers did. You work, you sacrifice, you fade into the background so your children can shine. But deep down, I missed being part of something. I missed being needed. One afternoon, years ago, a former student of mine came to visit. She was holding a small glass jar in her hands. "You know, Mrs. Cole," she said, smiling, "I still use this cream from 1989. I've tried others, but nothing ever felt the same." I looked at that jar. The label was faded, the lid scratched, but it was ours. The first formula Henry and I created together. I smiled and said, "I'm glad you still like it." But as soon as she left, I sat down at the table and cried. It wasn't sadness, not exactly. It was something deeper, a mix of pride and bitterness. The world had moved on, but that jar was proof that once I had mattered. Now, years later, sitting alone with the wooden box in front of me, those memories came flooding back. The smell of lavender oil, the sound of Henry's laughter when we burned our first batch, the nights we stayed up dreaming about the future. And yet, I also remember the silence, the way he stopped asking for my opinion, the way he made decisions without me, the way my name slowly disappeared from everything we built. I ran my fingers over the box, feeling the rough texture of the wood. For a moment, I thought maybe this was Henry's way of saying goodbye. Maybe the box was symbolic, his way of closing our story, leaving me one final memory to hold on to. But something inside me wouldn't let it go, the way he'd written that line, "For the woman who always loved me truly." It didn't sound like goodbye, it sounded like a clue. Henry had never been a man of big gestures, but he was precise. He planned everything, and if he left me this box, there had to be a reason. I stood up, walked to the window, and looked at the city outside, the same skyline we used to look at together when dreaming of what our lives would become. For the first time since the will reading, I felt something different. Not sadness, not confusion, something sharper. Maybe this wasn't the end after all. Maybe Henry hadn't forgotten me. Maybe he'd left me a message, one last thing to discover. I turned back to the table, staring at the wooden box again. My reflection in its polished surface looked older, tired, but also awake in a way I hadn't been for years. I whispered to the empty room, "All right, Henry. If this is your game, I'll play." It took me almost a full day to find the courage to open the box again. I kept it on the table, moving around it like it might bite me. Every time I passed by, I thought about Henry's note, about the strange line he wrote, "For the woman who always loved me truly." That evening, I finally sat down. The house was quiet, the lights were low, my tea had gone cold. I unlatched the brass clip and lifted the lid. Inside, there were only 3 things: a small USB drive, a folded handwritten letter, and a gold ring with one word engraved inside: "Forgiver." For a long moment, I couldn't move. I just stared at the ring. My hands were shaking. The last time Henry gave me a ring was on our 20th anniversary. He told me then that forgiveness was the secret to love. I didn't understand why this ring was here or what he wanted me to forgive. I picked up the letter next. The paper was thick and slightly yellowed, the handwriting unmistakably his, careful, steady, deliberate. It began simply, "If you're reading this, Maggie, it means I'm gone. And it also means I never found the courage to say what I should have said when I was alive." My throat tightened as I kept reading. "Inside this box is the part of your life that was stolen from you. I can't change what I did, but I can give you the truth. Don't look for it because of money. Look for it because it's yours, and because it's real." I stopped there, my fingers gripping the page so hard it crumpled. Stolen from me? What did that even mean? I looked at the small USB drive sitting next to the letter. It was black, simple, unmarked. For a few seconds, I just held it in my palm, feeling the weight of it. Then I took a deep breath, stood up, and went to the study. The computer screen lit up, its glow the only light in the room. I plugged the USB in. A single video file appeared on the screen. For Maggie.mp4. I hesitated for a second, then clicked play. The video opened with a shaky image, Henry sitting at his desk, older than I remembered him. His hair was thinner, his skin pale. The light from the lamp made half his face disappear into shadow. He looked straight into the camera. "Maggie," he said softly. His voice was weaker than I'd ever heard it. "If you're watching this, I probably didn't make it to tell you myself." He paused, taking a long breath. I could hear the faint hum of the oxygen machine somewhere off camera. "I don't know where to start. I suppose the truth is as simple as it is painful. The first formula, the one that built Colin Bloom, it wasn't mine. It was yours." I froze. Henry looked away, like he couldn't bear to see my reaction, even through the camera. I told myself that I took it because we were one, because we were a team. I convinced myself that your ideas were my ideas, that it didn't matter whose name was on the patent. But that was a lie. I took your work, your notes, your vision. And when the money started coming in, I let the world believe it was me who made it happen. He coughed, covering his mouth with a handkerchief. His voice cracked. I thought I'd make it right one day. I always told myself I'd fix it, that I'd give you credit when the time was right. But time ran out, and I never did. I'm sorry, Maggie. You built this company just as much as I did. Maybe more. I don't know if you'll ever forgive me, but I couldn't leave without giving you back what was yours. He reached off camera, then placed a folder on the desk. On it was written Bloom Original Formulas. In the USB, he continued, you'll find the full patent records, all dated before my name was ever added. They prove everything. I've already had copies sent to my lawyer, Evelyn Park. She knows what to do if you decide to pursue it. I leaned closer to the screen, my eyes filling with tears. I didn't just steal from you, he said. I took your voice, and I can't die with that on my conscience. What's in that box? It's not revenge. It's your truth. Take it back, Maggie. Not for me. For you. He stopped talking. For a long moment, the only sound was the quiet hum of the video. Then he looked directly into the camera one last time. I loved you more than I ever knew how to show, he whispered. Please forgive me. The video ended. The screen went black. I sat there in the glow of the monitor, unable to move. My reflection stared back at me, eyes swollen, face wet with tears. For years, I thought I had simply faded from Henry's world, that he had stopped needing me, stopped seeing me. But now, I understood. He hadn't forgotten. He'd been living with the weight of what he took from me all along. I looked down at the ring again. Forgiver. I held it tightly in my palm until it pressed into my skin. The truth was heavy, but for the first time in decades, it was mine. I didn't sleep that night. I kept watching the video over and over again, memorizing Henry's voice, his pauses, his apology. Every word felt like it reached across time to touch a part of me I'd buried years ago. When the sun came up, I already knew what I had to do. Henry had mentioned a lawyer, Evelyn Park. She was young, smart, and according to him, someone he trusted completely. I didn't know her personally, but I had seen her name on company papers before. That afternoon, I called her office. Her assistant picked up. Miss Park is expecting your call, Mrs. Cole, she said immediately. My chest tightened. Henry had really planned this. We met the next morning at a small cafe by the river. It was raining lightly, the kind of steady drizzle that makes the world feel quieter. Evelyn arrived right on time, a folder tucked under her arm, her hair pulled back neatly. She looked no older than 35. Mrs. Cole, she said with a warm smile, reaching out her hand. I'm glad you came. We ordered coffee and sat by the window. The rain streaked across the glass, and for a while neither of us spoke. She finally broke the silence. Henry trusted me, she said softly. He told me everything before he got sick. I helped him organize his files, and I've seen what's in that USB. I nodded, unsure what to say. Then you know what he did, I said quietly. Evelyn looked down at her cup, then back at me. I know he regretted it, and I know he wanted you to have back what's yours. She reached into her bag and pulled out a set of documents. The paper edges were crisp, freshly printed, sealed with official markings. Henry left behind a secondary contract, she explained. It transfers 60% of Cole & Bloom's shares to you, but there's a condition. It can only be activated if we prove that the original formula was yours. For a few seconds, I just sat there. My fingers tightened around my cup. The coffee had gone cold, but I didn't notice. How do we prove that? I asked. Evelyn smiled slightly. That's why I wanted to meet you. Henry mentioned you kept a notebook, your early notes on essential oils, ratios, blends, all the testing records. I felt my throat tighten. I still have it, I said. It's old, but every page is there. Every drop of oil, every failed mix, every success. I wrote everything down. Evelyn's eyes softened. Then you haven't really lost anything, Mrs. Cole, she said gently. You've just been temporarily forgotten. The words hit me harder than I expected. For a long moment, I couldn't answer. I looked out the window, watching the rain fall into the river, forming tiny circles that disappeared almost instantly. Forgotten. That was exactly how I'd felt for years. Not erased, not destroyed, just unseen. Evelyn opened the folder and pushed a few photos toward me. Henry's been preparing this for months before he passed, she said. He gathered proof, emails, drafts, and a few signed memos, Some of them show your handwriting next to his on early product notes. That's a start, but your notebook could be the missing key. I picked up one of the photos. It was of a document dated 1985 with a familiar formula written in my own handwriting. My initials were there, faint but visible in the corner. "That's mine," I said. My voice came out smaller than I wanted. "That's my test batch." Evelyn nodded. "Exactly. With your notebook, we can prove authorship and ownership of the intellectual property. It's not just about the shares, it's about recognition, about putting your name where it always should have been." For the first time, I felt something other than sadness, a slow, steady fire building in my chest. "They'll fight it," I said. "Andrew, Lucas, Rachel, they won't let this happen quietly." Evelyn didn't flinch. "I know," she said calmly. "I've dealt with worse. But you have something powerful on your side. Truth. And Henry made sure the paperwork can't be buried easily. He filed a partial transfer that can only be voided with your signature. That's why Rachel and the boys haven't seen it yet." I exhaled slowly, trying to process everything. "So, what do I do now?" "Bring me the notebook," she said simply. "We'll start from there." We sat there for another hour, talking through details, patents, timelines, media strategy. But even as she spoke, part of me was somewhere else. I was remembering those early days again. The smell of oils, the laughter, the dreams we had before everything became about numbers and power. When we finally stood up to leave, Evelyn reached out and touched my hand lightly. "Mrs. Cole," she said, "my mother once lost her job because she dared to speak the truth. I promised myself I'd never let that happen to another woman. So you can trust me. I won't let them silence you." Outside, the rain had stopped. The clouds were breaking apart and the sunlight was finding its way through. I watched it dance on the water as we walked out of the cafe together. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel invisible. I didn't feel small. As I walked away from the river, I caught myself whispering, almost without realizing it, "All right, Henry, maybe this is how you say sorry, by letting me finish the story you started." The first signs of trouble came faster than I expected. A week after meeting Evelyn, Cole & Bloom announced a major rebranding campaign. The company's social media pages filled with glossy teasers and photos of new packaging. Same formula, new face. At first, I didn't pay much attention, but when I saw the headline on the morning business segment, my stomach dropped. Rachel Cole, the new face of Cole & Bloom. Her photo filled the screen, perfect hair, perfect smile, holding one of the original cream jars I helped create decades ago. Underneath it, the slogan read, "Tradition is the past. The future belongs to the young." It was the same product Henry and I made in our kitchen 40 years ago, but now they were calling it Rachel's Renewal Formula. My name, my history, my work, erased again. That afternoon, I received an invitation to the exclusive brand launch event. The card was embossed with gold lettering and signed in Rachel's looping handwriting. "Family first, always." The irony made me laugh out loud. When I arrived, the lobby was crowded with reporters, influencers, and investors. The banners showed Rachel posing with Andrew, both of them smiling like a magazine cover couple. Lucas stood off to the side, his hands shoved into his pockets, looking uncomfortable. As soon as they saw me, Rachel's expression froze for half a second. Then she smiled, wide and polished. "Mom, you made it," she said loudly, loud enough for the photographers to hear. "You must be so proud." Andrew turned around, his jaw tight. "You didn't tell me she was coming," he muttered to Rachel, "but I heard it." Rachel ignored him. She placed a hand on my arm and leaned in close enough that only I could hear her whisper, "Please behave yourself. It's an important night." I looked her in the eye and smiled faintly. "Don't worry, dear. I've learned how to stay invisible." She didn't like that answer. When the event began, Andrew took the stage. The cameras flashed, the lights dimmed, and he began his speech with practiced charm. "Tonight," he said, "we celebrate a new chapter for Cole & Bloom, one led by innovation, youth, and vision." He turned toward Rachel, who was standing in front of the product display. "This company has always been about legacy," he continued, "but legacy doesn't mean staying in the past. It means building the future, and no one represents that future better than my wife, Rachel." Applause erupted. Rachel stepped forward, taking the microphone. "Tradition is beautiful," she said, smiling at the crowd, "but it can also hold us back. It's time to move forward, to redefine what Cole & Bloom stands for women who create their own path." I felt my throat close. She was talking about empowerment while standing on the shoulders of a woman she helped to raise. The cameras turned toward the audience, catching my expression. I straightened up, forced a small smile, and clapped twice. Slow, deliberate. The sound echoed louder than I meant it to. Rachel's smile faltered for a second. After the event, I found Lucas outside, leaning against a pillar. He looked like he wanted to disappear. "Mom," he said quietly, "I don't understand why he's doing this. Why does Andrew hate you so much?" I looked at him for a long moment before answering. "Your brother doesn't hate me," I said softly. "He's afraid of me." Lucas frowned. "Afraid? Of what?" "Of seeing the truth," I said. "Of facing what your father tried to hide." He didn't ask more, but I could see the question in his eyes. He was too young when everything started, too young to understand the shadows that lived in our family long before money got involved. That night, when I came home, I couldn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table again, the wooden box beside me, and remembered a moment I hadn't thought of in years. Henry was in his workshop, furious. Andrew was 12, standing across from him, his face red with tears. I was by the doorway, watching quietly. Henry slammed a folder onto the table. "You think you can just take shortcuts? That's not how you build anything that lasts." Andrew shouted back, "You always say that, but you only care about Mom's way, not mine." Henry's voice went cold. "That's because your mother actually finishes what she starts. You won't ever be like her until you learn to listen." Andrew froze, his eyes wide and wet. He didn't say another word. He just turned and ran out of the room. I tried to go after him, but Henry stopped me. "Let him be," he said. "He needs to grow up." But Andrew didn't grow up from that. He built walls. He turned that humiliation into fuel. From that day on, he stopped talking to me about his dreams, his schoolwork, everything. He only wanted to prove one thing, that he didn't need to be anything like his mother. And now, watching him on stage years later, I realized he'd finally done it. He'd become everything his father never wanted: ruthless, prideful, blind. The next morning, Lucas came by the house. He looked exhausted. "They're planning to replace the classic formula entirely," he said. "Andrew says it's outdated. He's pushing for Rachel's line to go global." I took a deep breath, trying to keep my hands steady. "It's not outdated," I said. "It's history. It's ours." Lucas looked at me helplessly. "What are you going to do?" I met his eyes. "I'm going to remind them who built this family, and I won't need a press conference to do it." He hesitated. "Does this have to get ugly?" "It's already ugly," I said. "They just don't see it yet." As he left, I caught sight of my reflection in the window, older, quieter, but not defeated. Somewhere deep inside, I felt that fire again. Henry's confession had given me more than proof. It had given me a reason to fight, and this time I wouldn't be erased. The house had turned into a war room. Papers covered the dining table, old notebooks, photographs, invoices, even a few yellowed receipts I had found inside an old recipe box. Every page smelled faintly of oil and lavender, a scent that pulled me back to the years when everything was still ours. Evelyn sat across from me, laptop open, glasses sliding down her nose. "These notes," she said, holding up one of my old journals, "are a gold mine. Every batch, every ratio, every test result, all dated before Cole and Bloom even existed. It's undeniable proof." I nodded, but the excitement in her voice didn't reach me. For her, this was a case. For me, it was a lifetime. We had been working for 2 weeks straight. No weekends, no pauses. Evelyn had called in a forensic document analyst to authenticate my handwriting. I had spent hours scanning old photos, searching through boxes for any trace of the early days. Labels I printed on our kitchen table, ingredient invoices from small suppliers, even the rent receipts for the garage where Henry and I stored the first shipment. One evening, Evelyn brought a large binder filled with documents. "These are the corporate archives," she said. Henry managed to copy them before his health declined. "Look here, the first patent draft, dated March 1986. It's signed H. Cole, but the original page has been replaced. You can see the staple marks don't match." I leaned closer. The faint outline of erased initials, mine, was still visible under the text. I traced the marks with my finger, my chest tightening. "He erased me," I whispered. "Not just from his life, but from history." Evelyn looked at me carefully. He also left the evidence so you could put it back. We spent hours cross-checking each document, matching handwriting samples, organizing timelines. Evelyn moved fast, her confidence steady, her tone both sharp and kind. I watched her work, young, determined, the same fire I once had when Henry and I were building everything from scratch. She stopped at one point and said, "You know, my mother was a chemist. She developed a skincare formula for a big brand in Seoul. They took her idea, changed 2 ingredients, and filed it under a man's name. She never got credit. I think that's why your story hit me so hard." I looked up. "Did she ever fight back?" "She tried," Evelyn said quietly, "but she didn't have what you have, proof. She didn't have someone who believed in her." The silence between us felt heavy but warm. For the first time in years, I felt like someone saw me, really saw me. Not as Henry's widow, not as Andrew's mother, but as the woman who built something with her hands and lost it to a signature. By the 3rd week, we had a case file that could shake the entire company. Evelyn called it Project Phoenix. "Because it's about rebirth," she said. I didn't tell her that the name felt too hopeful. I wasn't thinking about rebirth, I was thinking about closure. One afternoon, Evelyn arrived with a stack of forms. "If we file this claim with the patent office," she explained, "you'll legally establish authorship of the original formula. Once it's approved, you'll own not just the intellectual property, but the controlling shares. Cole and Bloom will legally belong to you." I stayed silent for a long time. The papers in front of me looked like freedom or revenge. I wasn't sure which. Evelyn leaned forward. "If you want to stop here, we can. Henry already transferred 60% of the company to your name. You don't have to fight if you don't want to." I looked at her. "It's not about the company," I said finally. "It never was. I don't need an empire. I just want them to know I existed." Evelyn nodded slowly, her eyes soft but proud. "Then we'll make sure they can't erase you again." That night, after she left, I sat alone in the study. The rain was hitting the windows softly, just like the day I first met her. The house smelled of dust and old paper. I turned on the desk lamp and opened the wooden box again. The USB drive was gone, already in Evelyn's hands, but the ring was still there. Forgive her. I picked it up, feeling its weight in my palm. For weeks, I had believed that forgiveness was what Henry wanted from me. That was why he left the ring, why he wrote the letter. But sitting there in the quiet of my home, surrounded by proof of everything that had been taken, I wasn't sure I could give it. Forgiveness, I realized, was not the same as peace. Sometimes peace comes only when the truth is spoken out loud. I placed the ring on the desk beside the stack of papers, the old formulas, the invoices, the faded photos of us smiling in the kitchen, and I whispered, "You wanted me to forgive you, Henry. But first, I need to forgive myself for staying silent this long." The house was still, but something in me had shifted. The fear that had followed me for months was gone. What replaced it wasn't anger, not exactly. It was clarity. Evelyn once said, "Justice takes time, but truth only needs one voice, brave enough to speak," and I had finally found mine. The flashes were blinding. Cameras clicked like machine guns, the sound echoing through the glass walls of the hotel ballroom. Rachel stood center stage, her hand looped through Andrew's arm, her smile flawless. The photographers loved her, that perfect image of grace and control. "Thank you all for being here," she said into the microphone, her voice steady and sweet. "Today, Cole and Bloom begins a new era, one built on innovation, on courage, and on honoring Henry Cole's legacy by doing even better." The reporters clapped. Andrew nodded proudly beside her, the picture of a confident heir. I could almost hear the PR team whispering behind the cameras, telling them when to smile, when to pause. I watched it all from my small apartment, the lights dimmed, the television screen flickering across the room. The glow from the broadcast lit my face, older, thinner, but not weak anymore. My hands rested on my knees, steady. Evelyn stood next to me, her phone buzzing with notifications. She muttered half to herself, "This isn't a press conference, this is an execution." I didn't answer. I couldn't take my eyes off the screen. Rachel leaned closer to the microphone again. "Henry believed in the next generation," she continued smoothly. "He taught us that progress means having the courage to move forward, even when it means letting go of the past." The audience nodded. Cameras zoomed in. The new product line stood behind her on a sleek display. The same jars I'd helped design decades ago, only now rebranded, sleeker, colder. The label read Rachel Renewal, Inspired by the original Cole and Bloom Heritage formula. Inspired. That word made my stomach turn. Evelyn crossed her arms. They're not just rewriting history, she said. They're deleting it. The next segment of the broadcast cut to a promotional video, Rachel standing in a modern lab, pretending to mix ingredients while voice-over narration described a bold, new vision led by the next generation of innovators. I recognized the shelves behind her. They were the same shelves Henry and I had used in our first factory. Everything about that video was a lie. I reached for the remote and paused the screen. Rachel's smiling face froze mid-laugh. "Do you see that shelf?" I asked Evelyn quietly. She nodded. "Yes." "Henry built that himself," I said, "and I painted it. Every jar you see on that table was from the same batch we made in 1989. I can tell by the label color. It's slightly off-white. They use those old containers to make it look authentic." Evelyn looked closer at the screen, her jaw tightening. "They're using your original product for their rebrand." I nodded slowly. They didn't even bother to hide it. At that moment, my phone buzzed. A message appeared from an unknown number. It read, "Mrs. Cole, you don't know me, but I worked for your husband for years. I can't watch this anymore. They're using your old formula. Just change the packaging. I have proof. Please be careful." Evelyn read over my shoulder. "Do you recognize the number?" "No," I said. "But they used Henry's internal code name for the formula, H89LV. Only the original staff knew that." She looked at me sharply. "That means it's real." I stared at the message again. My fingers trembled slightly, not from fear but from something stronger. Control returning. "Text them back," Evelyn said. "Ask for documents, photos, anything that connects it to your batch." I nodded, typing carefully. "Send me proof. Don't contact me again until it's safe." As I hit send, the broadcast resumed. Rachel was now answering questions from the press. A reporter asked, "There are rumors the new line is based on Henry Cole's original formula. Can you confirm that?" Rachel smiled like she had rehearsed for this moment. "Of course not. This formula was entirely developed by our R&D team. It's new, improved, modernized." Evelyn scoffed. "Improved?" she repeated under her breath. "They took your work, diluted it, and called it innovation." I didn't reply. The camera zoomed in again, catching Andrew's expression as Rachel spoke. He didn't look entirely comfortable. He kept adjusting his tie, glancing off stage. Guilt, maybe just nerves. But I knew that face. I'd seen it when he was a boy caught lying about breaking a glass jar. For a moment I thought about Henry again. The man who built everything, the man who broke me, then tried to make amends with a box and a ring. He had trusted Andrew with the company, and now that trust had turned into betrayal. Not just of me, but of everything we built together. When the conference ended, reporters rushed the stage. Rachel and Andrew posed for photos, all smiles and perfect angles. "The future belongs to the young," Rachel said again as the cameras flashed. I turned off the television. The apartment fell silent. Evelyn spoke first. "They're too confident. That's good. They won't see it coming." I looked down at the table. The wooden box sat there, open, the USB drive inside. My reflection flickered on its surface. Calm, determined. "I'm not going to shout," I said quietly. "I'm not going to fight them in the press. I'll let their own lies speak for them." Evelyn nodded, smiling faintly. "Then it begins." I picked up the USB drive and held it tightly. It was cold in my hand, heavier than I remembered. "This little thing," I said, "has more truth than all their cameras combined." Evelyn reached for her coat. "I'll start drafting the motion. Once we file, they'll be forced to present their data. If the old chemical markers match your formula, it's over." I nodded, but my eyes stayed on the TV, still frozen on Rachel's smiling face. "She thinks she's untouchable," I said, softly. "But so did Henry once." Evelyn turned toward the door. "Get some rest, Mrs. Cole. Tomorrow we bring the light." When she left, I sat alone for a long time. The rain outside had started again, tapping against the window in steady rhythm. I looked down at the message still open on my phone, the anonymous employee's words glowing faintly in the dark. I placed the USB back in the box next to the ring engraved "Forgive her." For a moment, my hand hovered over it. Then I closed the lid slowly. I whispered into the quiet room, not to Henry, not to Evelyn, but to myself. I don't know if I can forgive. Not yet. But I can make them remember. And for the first time, that felt like enough. The first betrayal had come from silence, from years of being ignored, from being erased quietly. But the second one, it came roaring through headlines, cameras, and my own children's voices. It started with a message from Lucas. He wanted to see me, said it was important. We met at a small diner on the edge of a town, the kind of place nobody from the company ever went. He looked nervous, glancing around like someone might be watching. "Mom," he said, his voice low, "I think Andrew's hiding something. The new formula, it's identical to yours. I ran the chemical analysis myself." I felt my stomach drop. "And?" He sighed. "He knows. Rachel knows. They're just pretending. They think you'll back down once the media turns against you." I didn't know what to say. For years, Lucas had been caught between us all, loyal to his brother, afraid of his wife, protective of me. Seeing him sitting there, hands shaking, broke something in me. "Then you have to choose, Lucas," I said quietly. "This can't be both ways anymore." He nodded slowly. "I already did." That night he went back to the office and told Andrew the truth, that he had been meeting with me, that he believed I was right. The next morning the house phone rang. It was Evelyn. "You need to see this," she said. Her voice was sharp, urgent. I turned on the TV. Andrew was standing on stage at another corporate event, surrounded by cameras. His smile was tight, controlled, the kind that hid fury. He didn't say my name, but everyone knew who he was talking about. "There are people," he said into the microphone, "who can't accept that time moves on, who can't stand seeing the next generation succeed, and when they can't build, they destroy." Rachel stood next to him, nodding with mock sympathy. The cameras flashed. By noon, the internet was flooded. Articles, headlines, talk shows, all saying the same thing. Margaret Cole, the bitter widow trying to ruin her family. Sources claim Henry Cole's wife is interfering with company operations. Cole and Bloom faces internal conflict as widow challenges inheritance. Every channel ran the same smiling photos of Andrew and Rachel, her hand on his chest, his jaw proud and confident, and my old photo, grainy and gray, taken years ago at one of Henry's charity events. I looked tired, distant. They made sure of that. Then came the article that cut the deepest. Insiders reveal Margaret Cole has been meeting secretly with former employees, attempting to sabotage product development. Sources say jealousy and grief have driven her actions against her own family. The author's name was one I recognized, Rachel's PR consultant. Evelyn called again that afternoon. "Don't look at the comments," she warned. "They're tearing you apart online." But I already had. Thousands of strangers were debating who I was, what kind of mother, what kind of wife. People who didn't know my name a month ago were now dissecting my entire life. The bitter widow. That phrase burned itself into my mind. I'd spent 45 years building something out of love, and now I was being painted as someone who destroyed it out of spite. Lucas showed up that evening, pale and shaking. "Andrew found out I met you," he said. "He kicked me out." "What do you mean, kicked you out?" "He said I'm done at the company. He told security to revoke my badge." Lucas laughed bitterly, eyes glistening. He said, "If you stand with her, you lose everything." I swallowed hard. "And what did you say?" He looked at me, voice barely a whisper. I told him if I stood with him, I'd lose myself. Something inside me cracked, but not from sadness, from pride, fierce and painful. My son, the quiet one, had finally found his voice. Later that night, Evelyn came by with 2 cups of coffee. The TV was still on, playing clips from the press coverage. Rachel's headline flashed again. "Family betrayal, mother-in-law turns on son's company." Evelyn set the coffee down and stood behind me. "They're building a narrative," she said, "and if you don't speak, it becomes the truth." "I don't want to play their game," I said. "I don't want to give them what they want." Another headline. Evelyn crouched next to my chair, meeting my eyes. "You don't have to fight them with anger. You just need to tell your story, your way. Right now, they're telling it for you." I stayed quiet. The flicker of the TV reflected in my cup. Rachel's voice came through the speakers, calm and rehearsed. "We've done everything to honor Henry's legacy. It breaks our hearts that some people can't move on." My jaw tightened. "She's good," I said softly. Evelyn shook her head. "She's rehearsed. There's a difference." We sat in silence for a while. Outside, the rain had turned into a storm. Thunder rolled over the city and the sound of wind filled the apartment. "She's going to win this," I said finally. "She's younger, louder. The world believes her." Evelyn took my hand. "Not for long. You have proof, Mrs. Cole. You have the truth, but you need to stop letting them tell your story like you're already gone." I looked at her. "You think anyone wants to hear it? An old woman's story about oil blends and betrayal?" She smiled faintly. "I think the world loves a comeback more than it loves a scandal." I didn't answer. My eyes went to the wooden box on the table again. It had been sitting there for weeks, always within reach, but never opened. I reached for it now, my fingers tracing the smooth edges. Inside, the USB and the ring waited. I opened the lid. The ring glinted in the light. Forgive her. For the first time, I didn't know what that word meant anymore. Forgive who? Henry? Andrew? Myself? Evelyn stood quietly watching me. "You don't have to forgive anyone tonight," she said. "Just decide what comes next." I looked down at the ring one more time. "Then what comes next," I said slowly, "is the truth. The real one." Outside, the wind howled louder, rattling the window. I closed the box, my hand firm this time. They could call me the bitter widow. They could twist my story, turn my silence into guilt, but they couldn't erase me again. Not this time. It was close to midnight when I heard the knock on the door. 3 short taps, quiet, deliberate. When I opened it, no one was there. Only a small brown envelope sitting neatly on the welcome mat, as if someone had placed it with care. For a moment, I just stood there staring at it. The night outside was still. Even the rain had stopped. I bent down, picked it up, and carried it inside. There was no return address, no markings, just my name, written in neat, sharp letters. Margaret Cole. I set it on the table next to the wooden box and sat down. The lamp cast a thin, yellow circle over everything. The envelope, the cup of untouched tea, the scattered papers Evelyn and I had been reviewing. I ran my finger under the flap and tore it open. Inside was a single document, thick paper, fresh ink, the company's letterhead printed across the top. Contract of renunciation, full release of ownership. At the bottom there was already a signature line waiting for me. And taped to the corner, a small note, written in Rachel's handwriting. I'd recognize it anywhere. "Sign it and rest in peace." I read it twice. Then again. For a few seconds I couldn't decide whether to laugh or cry. The handwriting was beautiful. Even her cruelty came neatly packaged. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the paper under the lamp. The shadows of the letters stretched across the table like cracks. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel afraid. I just felt done. They still didn't understand. After everything they'd taken, my name, my work, my silence, they still believed fear could buy obedience. But fear only works when you have something left to lose. I folded the contract carefully and placed it beside the wooden box. The grain of the maple caught the light, soft and familiar. My hands brushed over the lid, feeling the faint indentation where the brass latch had worn smooth. I remembered the first time Henry and I used that same type of paper, when we signed our first supplier contract, sitting at the kitchen table with nothing but coffee and hope. Back then, signing something felt like a promise. Now, it felt like a threat. The note beside me fluttered in the draft from the window. "Sign it and rest in peace." I almost smiled. Rest in peace. That was Rachel's way of saying disappear quietly. I reached for a pen, uncapped it, and for a moment let the tip hover over the signature line. I imagined their faces when the courier returned with my signature, the triumph, the relief. They'd think they'd finally silenced the old woman haunting their empire. Then I set the pen down. No, I thought. I've been silent long enough. I picked up the letter again and tore it in half. Then again. And again. Until the pieces were so small they looked like snow falling onto the table. The sound of the paper tearing was louder than I expected. It filled the room, sharp and satisfying. I took a deep breath and leaned back. The night outside was completely still now. No wind, no rain, just quiet. In the corner of the room, the wooden box waited, half open. Inside, the ring gleamed faintly under the lamplight. Forgive her. I looked at it for a long moment, my reflection bending in its curve. "You were right, Henry," I whispered. "Forgiveness is harder than hate. But tonight I finally understand. I don't need to forgive to be free." I closed the lid gently, the click of the latch echoing through the still air. Then I turned off the lamp. In the darkness, I could see the faint glow from the streetlights outside, casting long, soft shadows across the room. I whispered more to myself than anyone else. They still think I'm afraid. They still think they can make me disappear, but I've already lost too much to fear anything anymore. And for the first time in a very long time, I slept peacefully. Evelyn called just after dawn. Her voice was calm, but I could hear the tremor behind it. "Mrs. Cole," she said, "you need to see this. There was a second file on the USB, hidden inside a locked folder. I think Henry wanted you to find it when the time was right." I didn't answer. I just listened to the soft crackle of her breathing through the phone, the quiet urgency in her tone. "Come by," I said. When she arrived, the city was still half asleep. The sky outside was pale gray, and light rain traced slow lines down the windows. Evelyn set her laptop on the table next to the wooden box and connected the USB. A single file appeared. Truth 2 MP4. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then I nodded. She pressed play. The screen flickered, then steadied. Henry appeared again, older this time, weaker. His hands trembled slightly, resting on the lab table. The room behind him was the old testing space, the same one we built together decades ago. The air seemed thick with memory. His voice came softly, fragile but steady. "If someone finds this, if she finds this, tell her the truth." He looked directly into the camera. The first formula was hers. She created it from nothing. I only helped her scale it. I told myself we were a team, that it didn't matter whose name was printed. But it mattered. It always mattered. He stopped for a long breath. The sound of machines hummed faintly in the background. His fingers brushed the workbench like he was grounding himself. "If anyone asks," he continued, "say the truth. Not for money. Not for the company, but for conscience. For her." His voice cracked on the last word. He looked away, and I saw something I hadn't seen in years. Regret, naked and raw. Then he smiled faintly, as if remembering something. "We're a team, Maggie," he whispered. "Always were." The video ended abruptly, the screen fading into static before going black. For a moment, I just sat there, unable to move. The only sound in the room was the soft buzz of the computer fan and the rain outside. My hands were shaking, but not from fear, from something deeper, older. I reached out and touched the screen. The light from it bathed my hand in gold. For a second, it felt like he was there. The warmth, the smell of the oils, the sound of him laughing when we burned our first batch of lavender. Evelyn said something, but her voice sounded far away. I was back in that tiny kitchen years ago, standing beside him as he leaned over the stove, grinning like a fool. "We're a team, Maggie." That memory wrapped around me like a blanket. For the first time, it didn't hurt. The tears came quietly, no sobs, no shaking, just a slow, steady stream that fell onto my hands, glimmering in the yellow light of the screen. I let them fall. Henry's face still lingered in my mind. Tired, remorseful, but at peace. It wasn't betrayal anymore. It was confession. It was a man trying. Too late to set something right. Evelyn closed the laptop gently, giving me space. "He wanted you to have this," she said softly. "He wanted you to know he didn't forget." I nodded, wiping my eyes. "He didn't," I said. "He just didn't know how to remember." The room felt different after that. Lighter, as if something invisible had finally loosened its grip. I looked toward the window. The rain had stopped. Sunlight began to break through the clouds, filling the room with that soft golden glow that only happens after storms. I turned back to the wooden box. It was open, the ring still inside. I picked it up, turning it between my fingers. Forgive her. For so long, that word had felt like a burden. Now, it felt like a choice. I closed my hand around the ring and whispered, "All right, Henry. I forgive you. Not because you earned it, but because I need to let it go." Outside, the light grew brighter. The storm was over. The courtroom was colder than I expected. The walls were white, the air too still. Cameras weren't allowed inside, but I could feel the weight of the world waiting beyond the doors. Evelyn sat beside me, calm, collected, her laptop open and the small USB drive in her hand. Across the aisle, Andrew entered first, flanked by two lawyers in dark suits. His face was hard, his eyes fixed straight ahead. Rachel followed, perfectly dressed, smiling faintly like this was just another public appearance. When the judge entered, everyone stood, The scrape of chairs filled the room, then silence. My heartbeat was the only sound I could hear. Evelyn leaned toward me and whispered, "No matter what happens, we already won. The truth is in the file." I nodded, though my throat was too tight to answer. The hearing began. Papers shuffled, arguments rose and fell like waves. Andrew's lawyer spoke first, smooth, confident, rehearsed. They called it a misunderstanding, an emotional claim, a sentimental misinterpretation of old documents. When it was our turn, Evelyn stood. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't posture. She simply placed the USB in my old notebook on the table and said, "Your Honor, we don't have opinions. We have evidence." The judge gestured for her to proceed. Evelyn inserted the USB into the courtroom monitor. The screen flickered and Henry's face appeared. The same room, the same soft light. A hush fell over everyone. Even the lawyers stopped moving. Henry's voice filled the air, weak but clear. "The first formula, the one that built everything, wasn't mine. It was hers. Margaret Cole, the woman who built this dream." He paused, looking straight into the camera. "If anyone ever asks, tell the truth. Not for money, for conscience." When the video ended, no one spoke. The silence was total, heavy, electric. Even Rachel's fake smile had frozen, her eyes wide, unfocused. Andrew stared at the table, his jaw clenched so tightly his face trembled. Evelyn let the silence stretch. Then she placed my notebook beside the screen, open to the first formula page. My handwriting filled the lines, the date, the measurements, the small smudge of oil from decades ago. "This," she said quietly, "is what he was talking about." The judge leaned forward, scanning the documents. The courtroom clerk took the notebook carefully, turning the pages as the camera projected each one onto the monitor. Faded ink, stains, sketches of bottles and oils. My life, line by line, proof by proof. When it was over, the judge looked up. "The court recognizes the presented evidence as authentic and binding," he said. His voice was calm but final. "Effective immediately, the intellectual property of the original Cole and Bloom formula is hereby attributed to Mrs. Margaret Cole." The sound that followed wasn't applause. It wasn't gasps. It was the soft, collective exhale of everyone in the room, the release of something that had been held too long. Evelyn turned to me, her eyes glistening but steady. 60%, she whispered. "You're now the legal co-founder and majority owner of Cole and Bloom." I didn't speak. I just looked down at my hands, folded in my lap. They were trembling, not from excitement, but from something quieter. Across the room, Andrew sank back in his chair. Rachel reached for his arm, but he didn't move. The mask of confidence had cracked. For a long time, no one said anything. Then the judge rose and left. The gavel echoed once, sharp, final. Evelyn began packing the documents, her hands moving quickly, efficiently. "It's over," she said softly. But I shook my head. "No," I said. "It's finished. That's different." I stood slowly. The sunlight had started to filter through the tall windows, casting soft gold across the courtroom floor. It touched the edge of my notebook, the pages glinting faintly like they were alive again. As I walked out, the world felt still. The years of silence, the humiliation, the loss. All of it had led here. Not to victory, but to peace. Outside, reporters were waiting, shouting questions. "Mrs. Cole, how do you feel? Do you have a message for your son?" I stopped at the top of the steps, the wind catching my coat. Cameras flashed. "I have nothing to add," I said quietly. The truth already spoke for me. And then I walked away. The news broke before sunrise. By the time I woke up, every headline carried their names. Rachel Cole dropped by major sponsors. Cole and Bloom under investigation. The real founder speaks through the courts. It wasn't my doing. Evelyn had warned me that once the verdict went public, the media would devour them on their own, and they did. Rachel's image, once flawless, began to crack under the weight of exposure. One by one, the brands she endorsed pulled out. The perfume campaign vanished overnight. The magazines replaced her face with someone new. Online, her followers turned. The comments under her last post were a battlefield of disbelief and anger. "You built your fame on a lie. Now we know who the real woman was." Andrew tried to stay silent, but the company board suspended him within days. The investors wanted distance, the lawyers wanted control. He walked out of the headquarters through a swarm of cameras, his eyes down, no statement given. For the first time, there were no speeches, no defenses, only silence. I watched the news that morning from my kitchen, the same place where Henry and I had mixed our first batch of oil so many years ago. The irony wasn't lost on me. The empire that began here had come full circle, back to its origin, and this time the truth had its name printed on it. There was a photograph circulating everywhere, me and Evelyn leaving the courthouse. She was holding my hand, both of us walking through a sea of microphones and flashes. Someone online had captioned it, "Not revenge, just truth." People called it a symbol of quiet justice. I didn't feel victorious, just relieved. That afternoon, I sat on the balcony with Lucas. The air smelled like rain, the city still humming in the distance. He hadn't said much during the whole process, but now, as the light began to fade, he turned to me. "Mom," he said softly, "I used to think you were weak, always quiet, always stepping aside. But now I understand. You were never weak. You were just trying to keep your dignity while everyone else lost theirs." I looked at him and smiled faintly. "Silence isn't weakness, Lucas," I said. "Sometimes it's just patience." He nodded, his eyes glistening a little. Below us, the streetlights flickered on. Life went on, as it always does. People passed by, carrying groceries, holding hands, rushing home, unaware that somewhere above them, a woman who had once been erased had finally been seen again. On the table beside me, the wooden box sat closed, the word forgiver faintly visible under the soft evening light. I reached out, tracing it with my fingertips. Rachel had lost everything. Andrew was facing hearings of his own. The empire would rebuild, but differently this time. Cleaner, smaller, honest. And for once, my name wasn't hidden. It stood there, beside Henry's, not as a token, but as truth. I didn't feel joy or vengeance, just a quiet calm. Like the moment after a long storm when the world exhales and light slowly returns. Lucas poured me a cup of tea and smiled. "What will you do now, Mom?" I looked out toward the fading horizon. "Live," I said simply, "maybe for the first time." 6 months later, the city looked different. The air by the river carried the scent of new beginnings, faintly floral, faintly hopeful. On a quiet corner near the old pier stood a modest brick building with a pale white sign, New Bloom Institute. It wasn't large or luxurious, just a handful of rooms filled with sunlight, a few tables, shelves of glass jars, and the soft hum of women talking. The kind of place that didn't impress you with grandeur, but with peace. This was the dream that had grown from the ashes of another. That morning, I stood in front of 12 women seated in a small classroom. Most of them were in their 50s or 60s, faces marked by years of giving, enduring, and starting over. They weren't here for sympathy. They were here for another chance. "Good morning," I said, smiling as I adjusted my glasses. "Welcome to New Bloom, a place where second chances aren't just allowed, they're expected." A woman in the front row raised her hand shyly. Her name was Clara, 56 years old, a former accountant. She spoke softly, but her voice carried a weight that silenced the room. "My husband took everything when he left," she said. "The house, the business, even the car. He told me I was too old to start again, that my best years were behind me." The room went quiet. I walked closer and rested a hand on her shoulder. "Then let's start," I said, smiling gently, "from exactly what they think we can't." A few women nodded. One wiped her eyes. I could see it. That small flicker of belief, the same spark I once thought I'd lost forever. Lucas was at the back of the room, arranging chairs, his sleeves rolled up. He'd taken charge of the counseling program, helping women rebuild not just careers, but confidence. Evelyn handled the legal workshops, teaching them how to protect their work, their names, their worth. Together we'd built something simple but real, a place where women like me could remember who they were before the world told them who they couldn't be. Later that afternoon, after the class ended, I went to the small lab at the back of the building. The air smelled of lavender, lemon balm, and something new. On the counter sat rows of jars, the first batch of our new line. I took one in my hands. The label was plain, written in my handwriting, Forgiver Balm. It wasn't meant to sell millions. It wasn't about business anymore. It was about meaning, about remembering that healing and creation often come from the same place. As I mixed the final batch, I felt a calm I hadn't known in years. The sunlight from the window warmed my hands, catching on the gold band of my wedding ring, the same ring Henry had given me, the one I had once thought symbolized only loss. Now it felt different, lighter, like forgiveness. Lucas came in, carrying a box of printed brochures. "You know, Mom," he said then, "this place, it feels alive, like you brought him back somehow." I smiled, still stirring the balm. "Maybe not him," I said softly, "but maybe the part of him that still believed in starting again." He nodded, watching me in silence for a moment before turning to leave. When the room was quiet again, I placed the jar of Forgiver balm on the shelf, right beside the wooden box that had started it all. Its surface was worn smooth now, but it still caught the light in a way that made it look almost golden. I whispered, almost to the air, "New bloom." Outside, the river shimmered in the late afternoon sun, the water reflecting soft waves of light against the windows. For the first time in a long time, I didn't think about the past or the pain. I just watched the light move, endlessly, gently, and let it wash over me. It wasn't a new empire. It was something smaller, quieter, and infinitely stronger. A new beginning. The sun was setting when I returned to the small lab. The last light of the day filtered through the window, warm and golden, touching the shelves of glass jars and the soft swirl of dust in the air. Everything was quiet. Only the faint ticking of the old wall clock and the scent of lavender oil filled the room. I walked slowly to the work table. The wooden box sat there, the same one that once carried Henry's secrets, my heartbreak, and the beginning of everything that followed. Its surface had darkened over time, the grain of the maple wood smoother now, like it had finally made peace with its own history. I sat down, resting both hands on the lid. For a long time, I just breathed. 6 months ago, I had opened it with fear. Then it held a USB drive, a letter, and a ring. The remnants of a life that had fallen apart. Now it held something different. I lifted the lid. Inside were only 3 things. The same ring, still engraved with the word Forgiver, the same letter, edges softened from being read too many times, and an old photograph, a family portrait, slightly faded, the corners curled. Henry was in it, standing tall, proud. Andrew and Lucas, both just boys, were laughing in the sunlight, and me. I was standing between them, my hand on Henry's shoulder, my smile the kind that belonged to someone who still believed everything was possible. For a moment I traced my finger over the image, stopping on each face. I didn't feel anger anymore. Not toward Henry, not toward my sons, not even toward the years that had stolen so much. The pain had become something quieter, a memory with soft edges. I reached for the small carving knife on the table. Gently, I turned the box over and began to etch words into the wood, the blade moving slowly, carefully, as if the wood itself needed to hear them. For the woman who taught the world how to begin again. When I finished, I blew the dust from the carved letters and ran my hand across them. They weren't perfect. The lines were uneven, a little rough, but that made them mine. The sunlight had moved lower now, stretching long across the floor. The gold from the windows caught on the ring, the letter, and the photo inside the box, bathing them in a soft glow. I closed the lid gently, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was closing something. I felt like I was keeping something safe. I sat there a while longer, just listening, to the quiet hum of the evening, to the faint music drifting from the street outside, to my own heartbeat. Somewhere, a piano was playing, slow, hesitant notes, like a song learning to forgive itself. I smiled. People once thought I was a woman holding onto an old wooden box, that it was all I had left. They were wrong, because inside that box wasn't loss. It wasn't memory. It was the key to my own life, the part of me I had forgotten, the part that never stopped waiting to be found. As the last ray of sunlight touched the inscription, the words shimmered faintly, "The woman who taught the world how to begin again." And then the light faded, slow and soft, leaving the room in golden dusk.